night was as quiet as it was unforgiving. The night was as quiet as it was unforgiving. The moonlight barely illuminated the alley where Amara lay, curled up beneath a pile of discarded newspapers. At just 19 years old, she had already learned the harsh realities of life, surviving on the cold streets of Lagos, where hope seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. Amara had always been different from the other homeless girls she knew. She didn't beg, she didn't steal, and yet every day she found herself going hungrier, colder, and lonelier. But what set her apart most of all was her indomitable spirit, an unspoken strength that kept her going even when the world around her seemed to crumble. One evening, as she sat near a busy street corner, her stomach grumbling from hunger, Amara couldn't help but notice the sleek black car that pulled up to a nearby curb. The door opened, and a tall, handsome man stepped out, his crisp suit and polished shoes making him stand out like a beacon of wealth and power. The man, Kenneth, was everything Amara was not: successful, wealthy, and poised. But there was something about him that caught her attention. His eyes, dark and intense, held a quiet sadness. It was as if he, too, carried a burden of his own. For the briefest moment their eyes met. Kenneth's gaze lingered on her face, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he felt a strange pull. She was dirty, her clothes ragged, but there was a beauty in her, an inner strength that shimmered through the rough exterior. As quickly as the moment passed, Kenneth turned his attention to the crowd of people around him. But Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something in his gaze had ignited something deep within her. She stood up, dusted herself off, and moved away from the corner. But fate had other plans. As she walked, her foot caught on the uneven pavement, and she stumbled, falling right into Kenneth's path. His hands shot out to catch her, steadying her with a gentleness that surprised her. "I'm so sorry," Amara muttered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She quickly tried to stand, but Kenneth's grip remained firm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but sincere. Amara nodded, her heart racing. She couldn't quite believe she was talking to him. This wasn't supposed to happen. People like him didn't even look at people like her. But Kenneth didn't let go of her arm. Instead, he studied her closely, his brow furrowing slightly. "Are you hungry?" he asked unexpectedly. Amara hesitated, not sure if he was mocking her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only genuine concern. "Actually, yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kenneth smiled, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. "Come with me," he said, motioning toward his car. The drive to a nearby restaurant was quiet, with Amara unsure of what to say or how to act. She had never been in a car like this, never experienced a world so far removed from her own. When they arrived at the restaurant, Kenneth ordered for both of them, something that made Amara feel even more out of place. But as the meal progressed, something unexpected happened. They began talking, and talking, and talking. Kenneth learned about Amara's life, the orphaned child turned street girl who had tried so hard to hold on to her dignity. She shared her dreams of a better life, of escaping the grip of poverty that had clung to her since childhood. He, in turn, spoke of his own struggles, how his family's wealth had come with its own heavy expectations, and how he felt trapped in a world of luxury, yet devoid of true happiness. They connected on a level neither of them had ever expected. The night felt magical, surreal almost. By the time the meal was finished, it wasn't just about hunger anymore. They had shared parts of themselves that neither of them had ever shown to anyone else. Kenneth had never met someone so raw, so unfiltered. "You know," Kenneth said as he helped Amara into the car, "you've got a way of looking at the world that's refreshing." Amara smiled softly. "I've had to learn to see things differently. The streets, they change you." As the car pulled away from the restaurant, Kenneth turned to her with a serious expression. "I want to help you, Amara. I want to give you a chance. Whatever it takes." Amara was taken aback by his words. Help her? She had never asked for anyone's help before, especially not from someone like him. But there was something in his eyes, an earnestness that made her wonder if he truly meant it. "I don't know what I can offer in return," Amara said, her voice laced with uncertainty. "You don't need to offer anything," Kenneth said gently. "You deserve a better life. Let me help you get there." And just like that, their journey together began. Over the following weeks, Kenneth kept his promise. He found Amara a small apartment, hired a personal stylist to give her a makeover, and helped her enroll in a vocational program that would allow her to develop new skills. But as they spent more time together, it became clear that their connection was more than just a chance encounter. Amara began to feel emotions she had never expected. She had grown up in a world where love was a luxury she couldn't afford, and yet here was Kenneth, someone who saw her, truly saw her for who she was. He didn't care about her past, her flaws, or her lack of wealth. He cared about her soul. Kenneth too began to realize that the feelings he had developed for Amara went beyond charity. He had been so focused on building his empire, so focused on wealth, that he had forgotten what it was like to feel truly alive. And in Amara, he found a kindred spirit, someone who reminded him of the joy that could come from love and kindness. One evening, after a quiet dinner at his mansion, Kenneth looked across the table at Amara. Her eyes were filled with something that mirrored his own feelings. And in that moment, he knew. "Amara," Kenneth said, his voice soft but firm, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected anything like this. She had never expected someone like Kenneth to look at her the way he did. "Kenneth," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "are you sure?" Kenneth smiled, his hand reaching across the table to take hers. "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And as their hands met, their journey together took another significant step. A step toward a future neither of them could have imagined. The days that followed Kenneth's confession were filled with a sense of wonder and disbelief for Amara. It was hard for her to grasp the depth of what had just happened. She had spent so long surviving, never expecting that someone like Kenneth, a man with so much power, wealth, and influence, would want to build a future with her. It wasn't that she doubted his feelings. She had seen them in his eyes, in the way he spoke to her, the way he held her hand. But the world around them was so different from the one she knew, and she couldn't help but wonder if she truly belonged in this new world. The first few days were a blur. Kenneth continued to support Amara in every way he could, pushing her to pursue her dreams, giving her the tools she needed to succeed, and making sure she never felt like an outsider. Still, Amara struggled. She found herself hesitant in the face of such wealth and luxury. She would walk through Kenneth's mansion and feel as though she didn't deserve to be there. The polished marble floors, the glistening chandeliers, the expansive rooms, it was all so far from the alleyways and streets she had come from. It wasn't just the house that made her uneasy, it was the people. Kenneth's social circle was vast, filled with the rich and powerful of Lagos. There were countless gatherings and events, gala dinners, charity auctions, and private parties. Each time she was invited, Amara would struggle to find something appropriate to wear. Her mind clouded with worries about whether she would fit in. At one of Kenneth's charity events, Amara's discomfort reached its peak. As she walked into the grand ballroom, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She was in a designer gown that Kenneth had insisted she wear, but it felt like it didn't belong on her. The glittering jewels she had around her neck, gifts from Kenneth, felt heavy, a reminder of the vast distance between her humble beginnings and her present. She stood by Kenneth's side, her body tense as she tried to smile at the people who introduced themselves. The women were impossibly beautiful, their gowns expensive, their confidence radiating. The men were polished, well-spoken, each one seemingly more successful than the last. Amara felt like a small fish in an ocean of sharks, and as much as she tried to engage in conversation, it all felt so foreign to her. Kenneth noticed her discomfort immediately. He had spent so much time ensuring that Amara felt loved, supported, and cared for, but he had never realized just how out of place she might feel in this world. As he watched her nervously clutch her clutch bag, he realized that despite all the love they shared, the reality of their different worlds was beginning to take its toll. After the event, as they were leaving, Kenneth took Amara's hand, his voice soft and concerned. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he said, his tone gentle. "I know this is all new to you, and I don't want you to feel pressured." Amara looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's not that," she said, shaking her head. "It's just, I don't know if I fit in here. Everything is so different from what I'm used to. I'm not sure I can ever be the person these people expect me to be." Kenneth's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had thought that by offering her this new life, he was giving her everything she needed to be happy. But he realized now that happiness wasn't something that could be handed to someone. It had to come from within. "You don't have to change for anyone, Amara," he said firmly. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself. I fell in love with you for who you are, not for who you think you should be." Her eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, a genuine smile tugged at her lips. "I know, Kenneth, but sometimes I feel like I'm pretending." "You're not pretending," he reassured her. "You're learning, and that takes time. We'll do this together. But if you ever feel uncomfortable, we'll stop. I don't need you to be anything other than the amazing person you already are." Amara took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into him. And from that moment on, Kenneth was determined to help Amara navigate this new world at her own pace. He took her to quiet dinners, private moments away from the prying eyes of his social circle. He introduced her to a few close friends who were down to earth and kind, who didn't care about wealth or status, but valued the heart behind a person. Yet, despite Kenneth's best efforts, there was always that nagging feeling in the back of Amara's mind. Could someone like her truly be accepted in a world so foreign to her? She wasn't sure, but with each passing day she grew stronger. The quiet, beautiful moments they shared allowed her to see that she didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations except her own. One evening, as they sat in the small garden outside Kenneth's mansion, Amara finally found the courage to voice her biggest fear. "Kenneth, I don't want you to think that I'm ungrateful. I'm so grateful for everything you've done for me. But I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared that I'll lose myself in this new life. I'm scared that I'll forget who I really am." Kenneth reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Amara, I understand," he said quietly, "but I want you to remember something. No matter what happens, you'll never lose yourself. You'll always be the same person you were when I met you. You're strong, you're kind, and you're more than enough just as you are. I don't care about the things you've been through. I care about who you are now and who you're becoming." Amara's eyes welled with tears, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. For the first time she realized that she didn't have to choose between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. She could be both. She could embrace her past without letting it define her, and she could step into her future with the strength and dignity that had always been a part of her. And so they continued, navigating the complexities of their worlds, learning and growing together. Kenneth supported Amara as she pursued her education, and she encouraged him to find meaning beyond his wealth. Slowly, they began to weave their lives together, two people from entirely different worlds finding common ground, their love growing deeper with each passing day. But as their bond strengthened, so too did the forces outside their control. Amara's transformation didn't go unnoticed, and soon the very people who had once looked down on her for her humble beginnings began to take notice of her newfound confidence and beauty. There were whispers, both good and bad, among Kenneth's business associates, and some started questioning their relationship. The pressures of society, expectations and judgments soon began to encroach on their happiness. Would Amara be able to overcome these new challenges, or would the weight of the world around them tear them apart? Only time would tell. The tension between Amara and the world around her grew with every passing day. The whispers from Kenneth's associates became harder to ignore. At every business function, at every charity gala, the glances of the wealthy elite were unmistakable. There was no denying that they saw Amara as an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong. And while Kenneth did his best to shield her from the hurtful remarks, it was impossible to escape the subtle undercurrent of judgment. Amara, for the first time, felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had come so far. She had gone from a homeless street girl to a woman surrounded by wealth, opportunity, and love. But now she realized that these very things she had dreamed of were not as perfect as she had imagined. The glittering facade of Kenneth's world had cracks, and with each glance from the high society people, those cracks deepened. One night, after a particularly uncomfortable dinner with Kenneth's colleagues, Amara sat alone in her room, staring out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. She could hear Kenneth's voice in the hallway, speaking to his business partner in hushed tones. The voices were filled with tension, voices filled with disapproval, questioning his choice in her. Amara's heart sank. She thought she could handle this. She had been strong all her life, facing each challenge head-on. But this felt different. She wasn't sure if she could continue to play a part in a world where she didn't feel truly accepted. She wasn't sure if she could continue to live in Kenneth's shadow, trying to prove she was worthy of him and the life he had given her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Kenneth's voice followed, gentle but concerned. "Amara? Can I come in?" "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile onto her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. Kenneth entered and immediately crossed the room to where she sat, his face full of concern. "What's wrong? You've been quiet since we got back." Amara hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong in this world, Kenneth. I feel like I'm pretending every time I walk into a room full of your colleagues. They're constantly judging me. I can see it in their eyes." Kenneth knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Amara, I've been blind to this. I should have seen how hard this is for you. But you're not pretending. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're perfect just as you are." "I'm not sure that's enough anymore," Amara whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't know how much longer I can pretend to be someone I'm not." Kenneth's heart broke seeing the pain in her eyes. He knew she had been struggling, but hearing her speak it aloud made him realize just how deep her insecurities ran. He reached out and cupped her face gently in his hands. "You don't have to pretend, Amara. If anyone can understand the pain of feeling like you don't belong, it's me. My family's world. It's not everything. We can build a life that's ours, one where we don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but our own." Amara shook her head, her chest tight with emotion. "But what about your family, Kenneth? What about the people who think I'm not good enough for you?" Kenneth smiled softly, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "My family's opinion doesn't matter. What matters is that I love you. You've shown me what real strength is, what it means to fight for a better life. You're the most genuine person I've ever met, and that's what I fell in love with." Amara's heart swelled at his words, but doubt still lingered. "I don't know if I can handle it. The stares, the whispers, the judgment. I don't want it, Kenneth. I don't want this world anymore." Kenneth stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the city skyline, his mind whirring. After a long pause, he turned back to her, determination in his eyes. "Then we don't need it," he said firmly. "We don't need any of it. I've been so focused on building an empire for myself, I forgot what truly matters. You and I, we can create our own world, our own future, without the pressures of society's expectations. I'm willing to leave it all behind if it means we can be happy together." Amara looked up at him, her eyes wide in disbelief. "You would do that? You would give it all up for me?" Kenneth nodded. "Yes, I would. Because what we have is more important than anything I've built or anything anyone expects from me. I love you, Amara, and I'm ready to face whatever challenges come our way, as long as we do it together." The words she had longed to hear echoed in her mind, and for the first time in weeks, Amara felt a sense of peace wash over her. Kenneth's willingness to put their love above everything else gave her the strength to let go of the insecurities and doubts that had plagued her. It was time to build a new life, one they would create on their own terms. They spent the next few days making plans, quietly stepping away from the life Kenneth had once known. He sold off the properties and businesses that tied him to the world he had outgrown, and together they moved to a quiet town on the outskirts of Lagos. They found a small, modest house, a far cry from the mansion Kenneth had once called home, but to them it was everything they had ever dreamed of. Amara enrolled in a local university, eager to continue her education, while Kenneth pursued new ventures that didn't require the suffocating expectations of the elite. They spent their days surrounded by peace, their evenings filled with laughter and simple joys. The world outside no longer mattered. What mattered was the love they shared, the life they were building together. Years passed, and though the road ahead wasn't always easy, Amara and Kenneth knew they had made the right choice. They had found their true selves together, away from the distractions of wealth and status. In each other's arms, they had created a life built on love, trust, and the strength to overcome any obstacle that came their way. And as they stood together one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amara knew that the life she had always dreamed of wasn't about the riches or the glamour. It was about the love she had found in the most unexpected of places. With Kenneth by her side, she had found her true home. The end.